Welcome to part 5 in our series of programs titled Dominate Your Dominion. Today we'll be looking at Queen Abigail and King David to learn from them how we can dominate our T. Now you know that the word T is an acronym standing for our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. We need to learn how to dominate our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. Now let's turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 25. This is 1 Samuel chapter 25, and we want to read verses 2 through 3. 1 Samuel chapter 25 and verses 2 through 3. There was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. The name of the man was Nabal. And you see here a picture of Nabal, who was a shrinking person because he couldn't stand up to what was required of him by God to properly dominate his dominion. But his name is Nabal. And the name of his wife, Abigail. So you have Nabal and you have Abigail. The man, Nabal, was evil and harsh. The woman, Abigail, was wise and beautiful. So they're both rich, but one was evil and harsh, the other was wise and beautiful. Nabal was a very rich man, but he was only rich in what he had. There are 4 kinds of riches. Number 1, riches in what you know, that has to do with your thoughts. Second kind of riches, riches in what you feel, that has to do with your emotions. The third type is riches in what you do, that's your actions. And that forms our acronym T, thoughts, emotions, actions. So these are 3 kinds of riches so far. Riches in what you know, that's your thoughts. Riches in what you feel, that's your emotions. And riches in what you do, that's your actions. Now there's a 4th kind of riches. That's riches in what you have. That's your possessions. Well, Nabal had the lowest kind of riches, which is number 4, riches in what you have. He was a very rich man, but he was only rich in what he had. He was not rich in proper knowledge. He was not rich in proper feelings. He was not rich in proper things that he did. So his thoughts, emotions, and actions were not being dominated by the will of God. It was being dominated by himself and by the God of this world, who is Satan the devil. In Samuel 25, verse 3, 2 Samuel 25, verse 3, it says, and we already read this, that he was evil. That has to do with his thoughts and emotions. And he was harsh. That has to do with his actions. Abigail, on the other hand, she was a very rich woman, but she was rich not only in what she had, like Nabal was, but she was also rich in tea, unlike Nabal. So again, she was rich in what she knew, having to do with her thoughts. She was rich in what she felt, having to do with her emotions. She was rich in what she did, having to do with her actions. She was a very loving, giving, thoughtful person. She did things for people that helped people, that were godly. She also was rich in what she had. She had possessions. Now again, in 2 Samuel 25, verse 3, it says she was wise. That has to do with her thoughts. And she was beautiful. That has to do with her emotions and actions. And we can prove that the beautiful means her emotions and actions and not just her physical appearance by looking at a couple of scriptures. I'm not going to turn to them, but just for reference, you can look at Genesis chapter 29, verse 17, and you can see it does talk about Rachel in terms of her beauty. You can talk about, read in Genesis chapter 39, verse 6, where it talks about Joseph, but he was beautiful in his spirit. Esther chapter 2, verse 7. Esther was definitely beautiful in her appearance. In Jeremiah chapter 11 and verse 16, you see that God describes Israel and Judah as being beautiful, meaning beautiful in his approach toward them, beautiful in his attitude toward them, beautiful in his hopefulness toward them. And at certain periods in their history, they even were beautiful in their spirit. So it means not just physical appearance, but beautiful in spirit. So that's why I say it's having to do with the emotions and the actions. Now, everything fell apart for Nabal, though. Everything fell apart for Nabal. He could not dominate his dominion properly under God's instruction, and so his life fell apart. Because Nabal was evil and harsh, he couldn't dominate his dominion properly. In 1 Samuel 25, verses 4 through 5, and previously I think I had said 2 Samuel, it's actually 1 Samuel, and we're still in 1 Samuel. It's 1 Samuel chapter 25 and verses 4 through 5. We're just continuing where we started. 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 4 through 5. In verse 4 it says, David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. David sent 10 young men, saying to them, go up to Carmel and meet Nabal and greet him in my name. So I'm going to give you a little bit of backdrop here. This is before David was king. He wasn't yet king. David, at this point, was actually being chased by Saul, King Saul. And so he was living in caves. He was living in wilderness here and there. But wherever he went, he would protect the people who gave him refuge. All right, so that's a part of this background here. He would always watch over and protect people. So David is in the wilderness, and he heard that Nabal was shearing his sheep. Now, shearing the sheep means that this is the point where he's going to be selling the wool. You shear the sheep of their wool, and then you sell it. Nabal was a prosperous person. This was his business, having all these sheep and other animals. And this is how he made his wealth. So David knew that Nabal had some money. And David is sending 10 young men to Nabal. And he says to him, greet Nabal in my name. So they obviously knew each other. And Nabal would have known that David was destined to be king, just like Saul knew, just like other people knew, even though Saul was chasing him, because he had already been anointed as king by Samuel. And we're here in the book of Samuel reading. I shall now go into verse 6. We want to read 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 6 through 8. And this is going to be the first portion of part 8. So 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 6 through 8. David is still talking to his men, saying, this is what you should tell to Nabal. Tell him, long life to you. I'm coming in peace. I want the best for you. So long life to you, peace to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. He's setting the stage. I'm coming, greeting you in peace. I'm wishing the best for you. You would think that somebody that you know, they come to you and say, hey, how you doing? I hope everything is fine. I really wish the best for you. You would think that there would be something reciprocal on the part of Nabal. That was nice, but Nabal wasn't nice. He was evil and harsh. In verse 7, these are the words that they're relating to Nabal from David. I have heard that you have shearers. Your shepherds have been with us, and we didn't harm them. Neither was there anything missing from them all the while they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. In other words, David is saying, while I've been fleeing, I've been protecting your shepherds. And in this case, is protecting the shepherds from the Philistines, who would also try to raid Israel from time to time. David, of course, had already been pushed out by Saul, and David was trying his best everywhere he went to do the right things for people. So he's doing the right thing for Nabal by protecting his shepherds from the Philistine raiders. So no harm came to them. And David had his army with him at this particular time. And David is saying, ask your young men, they're going to tell you that we're telling the truth. They'll vouch for us that your business was protected because we afforded you that protection. And I've heard that you're shearing your sheep, so I know you have some money. And now we're going to hear the rest of the conversation. This is in the latter part of verse 8, 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 8, the latter part. So David is saying, therefore, given this backdrop that I've protected your business, make sure no harm came to it, therefore let the young men that I have sent to you find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a festive day. This festive day, when you take your sheep to the market or people come to your business and you're selling, this is what you've been waiting for, to make a lot of money. So I know this is a festive day, and I've sent my men at this particular time, and here's my request. So please give to your servants and to your son David whatever you find at hand. David is saying, I've protected you. Now I need a little bit of assistance. I know you're selling your sheep. You're about to make a boatload of money. So I'm hoping that you'll find it in your heart to at least give some provisions to the people that I have sent. I'm not demanding that you pay me a certain amount of money. I'm just leaving it up to your goodwill to determine whatever you're moved to do in your heart, I would appreciate it. That's what he's saying. Now in verse 8, it says that David made a request of Nabal, please give whatever comes to your hand, to your servants and to your son David. David makes this request because he had performed a valuable service for Nabal, serving as protection for his flocks in a time when Philistine raids were common, and therefore David expects to be compensated. Though David protected Nabal's shepherds and flocks for a long time, he did not expect to be compensated until Nabal made himself some money at the time of the sheep shearing. So David waited until he heard that Nabal was sharing his sheep. Which again, we can read in verse 4. David's not, coming to him at a time when there may be a low point in his business and still trying to say, I'm demanding money from you. No, first of all, he's not demanding money. He's asking. And on top of that, he's coming at a time when he knows the guy is overflowing with money. So you would think that Nabal would be nice and do something to help David, especially in light of the fact that David had helped him so much. David did not demand any specific payment from Nabal, nor set a price. He simply left it up to Nabal's generosity when he says, please give whatever comes to your hand. Again, that's in verse 8. But David shrewdly reminded Nabal how valuable the protection was when he said, your shepherds have now been with us, and we didn't harm them. Neither was there anything missing from them all the while they were in Carmel. That's in verse 7. Also, David was very polite to Nabal, so that Nabal would not give out of fear or intimidation. David sent 10 young men, saying, peace and long life be to you and all that is yours. That's in, again, 1 Samuel 25, verses 5 and 6. With that being said, what do you think Nabal's response should have been? In 1 Samuel 25, 9 through 11 now. This is 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 9 through 11. When David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal all the words of David, and they waited for Nabal's response. So what do you think was Nabal's answer? In verse 10. You heard that, right? That's a jackass speaking. And let me translate for you what this jackass Nabal said to David's men. David answered, who is David? Who does David think he is? Who is the son of Jesse? I don't give a flip about him. There are many servants who break away from their masters these days. So he's talking about how, and he's accusing David of betraying Saul. It's like, I'm breaking away from Saul because I want to form my own kingdom. That wasn't ordained by God. Samuel didn't anoint him to be king. Who does David think he is, setting himself up to be king? I've seen this before. Lots of servants don't want to be under their masters anymore, and they just leave and try to gather an army together and overthrow the current government. So who's David? He's just like all of these other people. Shall I take my bread that I've worked for, my blood, sweat, and tears? I'm the one who's raised these sheep. I'm the one who hired the shearers to do it. I'm the one who created a marketplace for this. No, I'm not taking my bread, my water, my meat that I have killed for my servants and give it to men who I don't know and don't even care about. You must be kidding me. That was Nabal's answer. Nabal was acting like a dumb jackass, just like you see in this picture. Nabal says this as a direct insult to David because he knew who David was, but he was refusing to recognize him. In our modern way of speaking, Nabal rhetorically responded, "Who does David think he is?" Nabal deepens his insult of David, saying that David is simply a rebellious servant. And we know that this was completely false because David never lifted his hand against Saul, who was Yahweh's anointed. So all these false accusations just to get out of doing something nice for David in return for all of the great things that David had done for him. That shows you that his thought process, Nabal's thought process, was simply perverted. He was selfish, and his emotions were also perverted. It's like, I don't care about this guy. I don't care what he does. I have no feelings for him. All I care about is myself. And then his actions were, of course, perverted because instead of giving something to David of value, he gave him the middle finger. Said, get out of here. Nabal was a very rich man in things, but was a very poor man in spirit. Thus he says, shall I take my stuff that's for my workers and give it to somebody I don't care about? In other words, he was saying to David, you can kiss my... Nabal's thought, having to do with his tea. Nabal's thought was, David is a weak wilderness freak, so I'm going to take advantage of his sorry situation by refusing to reimburse him. Nabal's emotions were irritation and exaltation. Irritation with David, because David dared to ask him for recompense, and exaltation with himself, because he believed that he was rich and increased with goods, in need of nothing, not knowing that he was miserable, blind and naked, and very vulnerable to poverty. Doesn't that make you think about something? Then Nabal's actions. Nabal's actions were reprehensible and nonsensical because he actually owed David for his prior service, and he didn't know whether or not he would need David's protection in the future. So that's really stupid. He's already protected you in the past. The Philistines are still raiding. So why are you pushing this person away that's done you a favor in the past and could give you protection in the future? So it's really stupid. Furthermore, to whom much is given, much is required. And Nabal had a lot. So he was given much by God. God caused him to prosper. At least he didn't stop him from prospering. And because of his prosperity, much is required. Those who have a lot should give a lot. That is our Father, right? He has a lot, all things. He gives us all things. He wants all of us to have all things that he has. We're destined to be co-heirs with Jesus the Christ and God our Father, inheriting all things. That means the entire universe is our incredible human potential. So God sets the pattern. He sets the standard and just says to us, that he's the one who gives stuff to in the first place. I mean, God's the one that created sheep in the first place. God is the one who created us as human beings and gave us the intelligence to be able to shear the sheep and then make clothes out of it. So after all, God's given us everything, and God says, to whom much is given, much is required. On top of that, God also says, it's more blessed to give than to receive. We should be generous instead of selfish, always looking to see what we can get as opposed to what we can give. So Nabal thought, emoted, and acted foolishly. Now, righteous indignation is a good thing. Unrighteous anger is a bad thing. So there's righteous indignation, and that's a good thing. There's unrighteous anger, and that's a bad thing. So how do you think David reacted to what Nabal said? Did David have righteous indignation, or did David have unrighteous anger? Which one was it? Understandably, David's anger was kindled against Nabal. Anger often comes about when we feel someone owes us and won't pay. We feel angry because that person wronged us and is indebted to us, and we want payment. Now, there are only 3 ways to satisfy the debt, thereby overcoming the anger. The first way is you take revenge on the debtor. You took something from me, I'm going to take something from you. And it's going to be perhaps of even greater value because I deserve it, because all the pain and suffering you put me through on top of what you took from me. So that'll satisfy the debt if I get you back. A second way, you make the debtor pay what they owe you. So in this case, let's just take somebody borrows your lawnmower. They borrow your lawnmower, they run over a big old rock, and it busts the blade, plus it busts the frame of the lawnmower. And it might even have caused the belt to burst. And the person doesn't want to pay you back. It's like, well, you loaned it to me, and you know that stuff like this could happen, and probably it was a bad lawnmower in the first place, so don't blame it on me. Now you know the person's lying, and it's like, dude, what are you doing? Just pay me what you owe me. Well, if the person doesn't, that's where you revert to number 1. You take revenge, and you go to the person's house, and maybe instead of taking his lawnmower, maybe what you do is you throw a brick through the window of his truck, and you use a knife to stab his tire. So it's a flat tire. And that's your revenge that you've taken on the person. So you either try to make the person pay you, and that'll satisfy you. If they don't, then you take revenge on the person. Well, both of those ways are unrighteous anger because we're taking vengeance into our own hands. We might be demanding something that we will never get, and we continue to be mad and hate the person because they owe us something. But there is a third way. There is a third way to satisfy the debt, thereby overcoming the anger. This third way is to forgive the debtor. Now, ideally, everybody who owes you something should pay you. That's ideal. And it's not bad to expect that. It's not bad even to go to court, for instance, and sue somebody so that they pay you what you're owed. That's totally fine. It's just the attitude behind it. The action could be great. It's the emotion behind it. Is that emotion the unrighteous anger where you turn to hating the person, wanting to get back at the person, hurt the person because they hurt you? That's when it's unrighteous anger. Now, righteous indignation is this person owes me, and that's a crappy thing that they did to not pay me. And yeah, I'm going to take them to court so that they don't do this to other people. It might not even be so much that I want to get paid back. It's that I want to stop this person from getting away with this. If they did it to me, they could do it to other people, and he's hurting people. So this is wrong. And I hope the person learns their lesson so that they stop hurting people. They stop getting people mad at them. Plus they stop hurting other people. So if that's the way you do it and it's out of love, that's righteous indignation. But if it's, boy, oh boy, I'm going to get that sucker, then that's unrighteous anger, and that's a bad thing. So the third way to satisfy a debt is to forgive the debtor. Now, which one of these does God want us to do? If a person won't pay you back, like Nabal wasn't about to pay David back, which one of these three does God want us to do? And which one of these did David want to do? In 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 12 through 13. 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 12 through 13. So David's young men turned on their way and went back and came and told David all of the words that Nabal had spoken. Verse 13. David said to his men, "Every man put on his sword." Man, I'm fuming. I'm burning hot. Put on your sword. Man, get on your horses. We're getting ready to go and take this dude out. Everybody put on your sword. And David also put on his sword. About 400 men followed David, while 200 stayed by the baggage. Again, wherever they were camped out, he needed to leave people behind to make sure stuff was protected. But out of the 600 men, he took about 400 men, and he was going after Nabal to get his revenge. Now, David chose to take matters into his own hands. David chose to take vengeance on Nabal. But here's where the heroine in our story comes in. Watch how Abigail handles the situation. So we've got three people. We've got Abigail, we've got Nabal, that's husband and wife, and we've got David. Abigail knows how to dominate her dominion, and she dominates this situation, and she brings good out of it. Whereas Nabal does not know how to dominate his dominion, so his world just crumbles around him. Watch how Abigail handles the situation, because this is how we should handle a situation. Abigail knows how to dominate her dominion. In 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 14 through 17. 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 14 through 17. It reads, "But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, 'Listen, come on over here, Abigail. I got to tell you something. I don't want Nabal to see me talking to you. But here's what happened. Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and Nabal insulted David. But the men were very good to us, and we weren't harmed, and we didn't miss anything as long as we went with them when we were in the field.'" So David's men never harmed us. They didn't do anything wrong to us. In fact, they were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. So, Abigail, I'm pleading with you. Therefore, know and consider, please consider this, what you will do. For evil is determined against our master. David is livid, and he's coming against Nabal. And he's coming with 400 people. David and all of his people are coming against our master and all of our master's house. And the reason why is because, let's just face it, and this is a bold thing for a servant to say to his master's wife, which means the wife is also a master over these servants. But they probably had conversations before. They might have had to look at each other, and it was like, oh my, look at Nabal. And so the servant says, "You know your husband, that he is such a worthless fellow that one can't speak to him. He is this dumb jackass. He is a worthless fellow that nobody can speak any sense to him. I mean, when we try to speak something of sense to him, it's just like whack, 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 goes in one ear and out the other, or it doesn't even go in. We don't know, but he's just a fool. So you got to do something because David is burning mad and he's coming to take vengeance. So understandably now, think about this. Abigail could support her husband and even encourage him to destroy David. That is one course of action that she could have taken. Many wives support their husbands even when their husbands are foolish and do stuff wrong. After all, Jezebel supported her husband Ahab and even encouraged him to destroy Elijah. So why couldn't Abigail encourage Nabal to destroy David? After all, the Bible does say that a woman should be subject to her husband. We find that in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 24, and also 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1. So in both places, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 24, and 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1, it says that wives should be subject to their husbands. So all of this is going through Abigail's mind, and she could have taken that course of action, said, fellas, look, okay, this is what we're going to do. You got to put on your swords just like David is, and we're going to ambush them. I'll go out and I'll act like I'm receiving them. You come from behind and just massacre them. And I'll set even a fire so that they can't run away, and you'll be able to massacre them. And then we don't have to worry about David anymore. She could have done that. And if she was a woman who did not know how to dominate her dominion according to God's values, that is the action she would have taken. But thankfully, she is a woman who had already dominated her dominion, so she thought through things. She didn't allow her emotions to run away with her. And she wasn't just impetuous in her actions. She thought about things, and she thought about what would Jesus do? Well, in this case, is what would Yahweh do? And so she was a godly woman, and she had dominion over what God had given her, which is her thoughts, her emotions, and her actions, and a lot of her property. But what else does the Bible say, in addition to saying that a woman should be subject to her husband? Because there's actually a principle that's higher than that in the scripture. This is not a contradiction. God does say that the wives should be subject to their husbands, but there's a higher principle than that. And what is this higher principle? The higher principle is found in Acts chapter 5 and verse 29. This is in Acts chapter 5, verse 29. And there it says, it is better to obey God than man. So in other words, yes, a woman should be subject to her husband unless doing something that her husband is commanding her to do, or suggesting that she does, is contrary to what God says. Then she needs to make the decision, I'm going to obey God rather than my husband. Now there's a warning, because God tells us in Romans chapter 6, verse 16, this is Romans chapter 6, verse 16, God gives us a warning saying, to whom you yield yourself servant to obey, to them you are a servant. So in other words, are you going to yield yourself as a servant to obey me, God Almighty, who created you? Or are you going to yield yourself as a servant to obey your husband when your husband is asking you to do something contrary to me? Because you can't serve two masters. All right, so that's the cautionary tale. Now, what did Abigail do? Which choice did Abigail make? Well, 1 Samuel chapter 25, now verses 18 through 19, in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 18 through 19, then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 containers of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 pounds of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on donkeys. She made haste to gather together a portion of her wealth And she said to her young men, "Go on before me, I am coming after you." But notice this, she didn't tell her husband Nabal. Now again, you might think, wow, you know, husband and wife, they're supposed to share all information. She shouldn't be going behind his back doing something. She should notify him. But we know that she knows, as well as all of her servants and Nabal's servants, that Nabal is a fool, that he's a dumb jackass, that he does not listen to reason. So her reasoning is, her thought process is, I will intercede. I will go to make peace. I will attempt to satisfy the debt that Nabal owes to David. I'm in this too, because if David's coming against Nabal and against Nabal's family and house, I'm going to be the first one that's going to be killed, or amongst the first ones that's going to be killed. And all this stuff's going to be taken anyway. So that's her thinking. And her emotion is, plus that, I want to save my husband, even though he's a fool and sometimes it's hard dealing with him. He is a good businessman. He does love me. And I do love him. So I want to protect him. That's the emotion. And then the action is, I'm going to take some of my wealth and I'm going to give it to David and to David's men. So you see how she has her thoughts, her emotions, and her actions under control, and is under the control of God. So Abigail chose to subject herself to the Most High instead of her high-minded husband. But please understand that she did this out of love for her husband. She was trying to save his life. So 1 Samuel chapter 25 and verse 20, Abigail got up on her donkey, which is interesting because Nabal is like a donkey and a male donkey is called a jackass. So I'm not cursing. I'm just saying that he acted like a male donkey, which is a jackass. So she's getting on her donkey, which is like symbolic. And I'm sure, because our Heavenly Father has a sense of humor, it's almost like it is Abigail who has to ride on top of Nabal to guide Nabal so that he doesn't destroy himself and her. So she's riding on a donkey, which in type could have been Nabal. And Abigail rode on her donkey and came down by the covert of the mountain. David and his men came down toward her and she met them. And she didn't know what was going to be the end result. David could have slaughtered her there, took all the stuff, and kept on marching to get Nabal because he was furious. In 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 21, now David had said, surely in vain I have kept all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that pertained to him. And he has the gall to repay me evil for good? How dare him? I am a warrior. Yeah, he's a businessman, but I'm a warrior, and I'm going to wipe him out. Now, verse 22, 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 22. David's continuing in his fury. Elohim do so to the enemies of David, and worse, if I leave of all that belongs to him by the morning light, so much as one who urinates against the wall. In other words, every man that I find, every boy that I find, I am going to slaughter them. And I'm going to do this with haste. It's not even going to be till the morning light. I'm going to chase them down, wipe everybody out, and just unleash all of my fury. Now, David at this point, obviously, did not have control of his dominion. He had hatred in his heart, bitterness in his heart toward Nabal and all of his possessions. Going back to Abigail. Abigail knows how to dominate her dominion, and this is so beautiful, so important. Abigail knows how to dominate her dominion and how to influence others to dominate their dominion. Let's see how this unfolds as she deals with David, because she's going to influence David to dominate his dominion in a godly perspective. So 1 Samuel chapter 25, now verses 23 through 24. 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 23 through 24. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got off of her donkey and fell before David, bowing herself to the ground. She fell at his feet, saying, "Please, please, please, David, let your servant speak. Please don't wipe me out. Please just hear me. Please hear the words of your servant. My Lord, on me be the blame." Wow. You talk about sticking up for her husband. Her husband is a fool. Nobody can talk sense into him. So she goes and talks sensibly to David, saying, "My Lord, on me be the blame." That is a lot, because she doesn't know. As she's bowed down, it's a lot easier for David to chop her head off when all he's got to do is pull his sword out, which is by his side, and just swing it across. I mean, it's a lot harder to swing up to hit somebody's head and chop it off. She's at the perfect position, being knelt down on her knees to just chop her head off. It's almost like she's offering her head to be chopped off. That's the type of love she has for her husband Nabal. And this is also the belief that she has, that she could reason with people. God says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the earth." And Abigail is thinking, I'm a peacemaker. God is going to bless me in this process. And I'm just hoping that God has gone before me to give David a soft heart. Now, verse 25, 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 25. 1 Samuel chapter 25 and verse 25. Abigail is continuing to speak. "Please don't let my Lord pay attention to this worthless fellow Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and foolishness is his gain. But I, your servant, didn't see my Lord's men whom you sent." In other words, what she's saying, David, when you sent your men to Nabal, I wasn't there. I know that Nabal is a fool. His name means fool, and that's his game. I know he's a fool. I know he's a worthless fellow, but please don't pay attention to him. Please pay attention to me, because what I'm saying is I realize that this is a family business. I own a part of this business, and I didn't see your men when they came to meet with Nabal. So I apologize for that. But I'm here taking the blame. And this reveals what Abigail meant by requesting that the blame be on her for Nabal's disservice to David. So she says, "Listen, I'll take the blame because I should have been there. And if I was there, I would have intervened and this would have never happened. So please let me make it right." Boy, oh boy, you talk about a wonderful spirit. Abigail was a cool hand on top of a hot head, which was David. Abigail was a cool hand on top of a hot head. Now, Abigail is about to stop David from doing a foolish thing against a foolish man by getting him to think about three things. So she works with David's mind and his heart in order to bring about the right action. So she deals with his thoughts, his emotions, in the hope of getting him to act properly in a godly manner. And that godly manner would be to accept what she was offering and also to forgive Nabal for his foolishness. So she starts off by getting him to think about three things, starting with taking vengeance isn't okay. David, taking vengeance isn't okay, because vengeance is God's prerogative. You don't need to step in God's place and take vengeance. And I see that you're angry. That's not the right emotional response to this. So don't take vengeance. That's not okay. That is unrighteous indignation. You have to allow God to work things out. So if God's going to take vengeance on Nabal, then let God do it. That's God's prerogative. That's the first thing she talks to David about. And that's dealing with his emotions. And then the second thing, don't use 400 men. You're bringing 400 men. Don't use 400 men to kill one little fool who insulted you. And after all, even though you are David, destined to be a king, you are just a man. Why do that when Yahweh used one stone, not 400 stones, not 400 men? Yahweh used one stone to kill one giant who blasphemed him. So David, you're talking about using 400 men to kill one little foolish man, and all he's done is insult you? When you were used by God, you witnessed this miracle. We all know about it. We all heard about it. It was on CNN. It was on, fake news channel, which is Fox News. It was there. It was on both channels. It was probably perverted when it was told on that particular channel, but you heard what God did. You know what God did because he worked through you. So why are you going to take 400 men to kill one little man, a foolish man, and all he did was insult you, when God used you and just one stone to kill this big old giant? And the reason why you were so angry at this giant was because this giant blasphemed God. That's righteous indignation. For somebody to blaspheme God, you need to stop people from blaspheming God and causing other people, as they're walking around like they're the king of the hill and intimidating everybody, and perhaps causing people to have a lack of faith in Yahweh. So yeah, getting rid of Goliath, that was a great thing. That was righteous indignation. But using 400 men to kill one little foolish man, and all he did was insult you, David, think about that. That doesn't make sense. So now she's dealing with his mind, his thoughts. She dealt with his emotions, saying, don't take vengeance, because this kind of anger that leads to murder in him and then servants that haven't done anything to you, that's just wrong. And then also she appeals to his mind, saying, no, this doesn't make sense to take 400 men to kill one little man. That's like overkill by 400 times. And then she goes on to say a third thing. As a future king of Israel, you'll see how God has been good to you. Then you'll feel good about being good to others. So this is now the action. All right? This is now the action. After you come to be a king and you see God has fulfilled all of his promises to you and has blessed you tremendously, all of this little stuff that he owes you, that's going to pale into insignificance. You could give that away every day and still be rich all the rest of your life. So don't sweat the small stuff. You're going to be the king of Israel. You're going to see how God is going to be so good to you, as he already has been. And then you're going to feel good about being good to others. You'll be magnanimous. You'll be a great beneficiary to people. So make sure that that's your actions, and envision yourself acting that way as just a very hospitable, very gracious person, in the same way that God has been gracious to you. So she deals with his actions, his thoughts, and his emotions. She deals with all of them. Now let's see how this plays out, okay? The first one, taking vengeance isn't okay because vengeance is God's prerogative. This is in 1 Samuel chapter 25, in verse 26, 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 26, and then verse 28, the first part of verse 28. So 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 26, and then we're going to drop down to the first portion of 28. And we're talking now about Abigail convincing David that taking vengeance isn't okay because vengeance is God's prerogative. So it reads, therefore, my Lord, and this is Abigail speaking to David, therefore, my Lord, as Yahweh lives and as your soul lives, since Yahweh has withheld you from blood guiltiness and from avenging yourself with your own hand, now therefore let your enemies and those who seek evil to you be as Nabal. Please forgive the trespass of your servant. In other words, what she's saying is God has taken care of your enemies in the past. God will take care of Nabal. You don't have to do it. I'm just appealing to you to please forgive the trespass of your servant. Again, there's three ways to satisfy a debt. Either the person pays you, Nabal's not about to pay you. You can take vengeance. I've already explained to you, and I'm explaining to you now, that's not the way to do it because God's the one who takes vengeance. So the third thing is you can forgive. And that's what I'm asking you to do, is please to forgive the trespass of your servant and let God deal with Nabal just like he's done to your other enemies, just like he's going to do to your enemies in the future. That way you don't have to avenge yourself with your own hand, and you won't have any guilt of blood on you because you'll be allowing Yahweh to take vengeance. And then the second one, don't use 400 men to kill one little fool who insulted you when Yahweh used one stone to kill one giant who blasphemed him. This is in 1 Samuel chapter 25. And now this is in the latter part of verse 28, and then we'll continue to verse 29. And this is still Abigail speaking to David. Yahweh will certainly make my Lord a sure house. I heard it, maybe not firsthand from Samuel, but the word on the street is that Samuel anointed you to be king. We know that Samuel's a prophet. We know that God speaks through prophets, and we know that Samuel anointed you to be king. Therefore, we believe that God anointed you to be king. Therefore, since we're under God's dominion and we walk by faith and not by sight, and this is why we have the proper dominion where we can exercise dominion over what God's given us to, because we have this perspective. I am telling you, David, that certainly Yahweh is going to make your house secure and sure. Why? Because you, my Lord, fight Yahweh's battles. That's why you are a man after God's own heart. And you fight Yahweh's battles. And this is Yahweh's battle. So I know that you're going to fight it in the proper way by, in this case, stepping back and letting Yahweh deal with Nabal. And you're only going to fight against someone when God tells you to pick up a stone or pick up a sword and use it. You're not going to just determine this on your own. So evil will not be found in you all your days. Verse 29 now. Though men may rise up to pursue you and to seek your soul, yet the soul of my Lord will be bound in the bundle of life with Yahweh your Elohim. He will sling out the souls of your enemies as from the hollow of a sling. And so she's using this play on word to connect with David, just like David used a slingshot to throw a rock and hit Goliath in the head, and Goliath fell, and then David took Goliath's sword and chopped off his head. Just like God even taught you how to use a slingshot and guided that particular stone to kill Goliath, God is going to sling out the soul of your enemies. God knows how to use a slingshot. So God's going to do that to your enemies. So don't use 400 men to kill this little fool. Just rely on God, who killed one giant with a slingshot and one stone. He'll kill all of your enemies by slinging them out as though they're in a slingshot and just throwing them aside, throwing them into the depth of the oceans, okay? So she deals with him in that way. And then the third thing she's talking about, as a future king of Israel, you'll see how God has been good to you. Then you'll feel good about being good to others. So this is now in 1 Samuel chapter 25 and verses 30 through 31, the first part of 31. 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 30 through 31. It will come to pass when Yahweh has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you and has appointed you prince over Israel, that this shall be no grief to you, nor offense of heart to my Lord, either that you have shed blood without cause, or that my Lord has avenged himself. So, I mean, David, once you become king and you're dealing with the entire nation of Israel, I mean, this is just going to be, I mean, just a small little thing. It's no grief to you. This probably won't even come to your mind much. If you think about it, you might say, yeah, I wonder what that fool is doing, but you're not going to be like wanting to kill him, because you're going to be thinking about defending the nation against people who are trying to blaspheme Yahweh, our God. You're going to be thinking about how you can bring peace and prosperity to us, your people. You're going to be thinking about much bigger stuff. So please keep everything in the proper perspective. So you see how she's dealing with his thoughts, his emotions, and his actions. Now, because of what Abigail has said to him, and he's thought about it, now David knows how to dominate his dominion. It took a woman, which it often does for us knucklehead men, it takes a good woman to help a man to come to his senses, to learn how to be more than just a caveman. Ugh, sword, ugh, head, ugh, cut, ugh, I win. I mean, that's how a lot of men think, like cavemen. It's just about war and who you can defeat. And women, God has blessed women with some wonderful qualities, and one of them usually is more about making peace, how to get along, how to demonstrate love. And that's what God did. He used Abigail, a very loving person who already knew how to dominate her dominion, to teach David, who was in some cases more like a caveman, a thug. Let me just chop somebody's head off today. I'm a warrior. Don't you mess with me. I mean, God brought Abigail into his life to help David to mature, become a much more well-rounded person, having some feelings of compassion and mercy and forgiveness, and helping him to see the big picture. Yeah, God will take care of me. I don't need to take care of this dude. God's going to take care of him, and he's going to take care of me. So David learned from Abigail how to dominate his dominion. So 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 32 through 35. 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 32 through 35. David said to Abigail, "Blessed is Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, who sent you today to meet me." This is David speaking now to Abigail, saying, "Blessed is Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, who sent you today to meet me." David is recognizing this is the hand of God. And I thank God that he sent you to me today. Today, because if he wouldn't have sent you today, there would be no tomorrow for you or your people. Verse 33, "Blessed is your wisdom, and blessed are you. You have kept me today from blood guiltiness and from avenging myself with my own hand. Indeed, as Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, lives, who has withheld me from harming you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, surely there wouldn't have been left to Nabal by the morning light so much as one who urinates on a wall." So David received from her hand that which she had brought him. All of that stuff her wealth, which was also Nabal's wealth. David accepted it as payment. So that satisfies the debt, financially speaking. But David goes on to do something even greater than that. Finishing up, verse 35. David says to her, "Go up in peace to your house. Behold, I have listened to your voice and have granted your request." So what was one of her requests? One of her requests was for David to forgive Nabal for his foolishness. Not only did David accept the cash as repayment for what he had done, and he just accepted whatever she brought. Again, didn't say to her, well, this is not enough for all the hours that I spent protecting your stuff, and considering all the hours of my men, I calculated it and you owe me X amount more. No, he didn't say that. It's just whatever was in the goodness of your heart, we accept it. Because I understand this comes not truly from your hand, but from the hand of God. So I accept it. So he accepted the monetary payment for his services. And that, in that sense, satisfied the debt. You don't owe me any more money. But remember, we said that a debt can also be paid by forgiving the debt, forgiving the debtor. That is what Abigail asked David to do, and that is what David did. So when David said, "Behold, I have listened to your voice and have granted your request," one of the requests that was granted, because he heard what she said, was, "I forgive Nabal." Now we know that Yahweh knows how to dominate his dominion. So is Yahweh going to take vengeance on Nabal? Well, let's read 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 36 through 38. This is 1 Samuel chapter 25, and verses 36 through 38. Here it reads, Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he held a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. Therefore she told him nothing until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, Abigail told him the things regarding David. As a result, Nabal's heart died, and he became as a stone. Then in verse 38, about 10 days later, Yahweh struck Nabal so that he died. Yahweh knows how to dominate his dominion. Yahweh says, vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord. And God took vengeance on Nabal. So Abigail was blessed because she used the keys to success. Abigail was blessed because she used the keys to success. What are the keys to success? This is where we started off. This is where we're going to end up. Elohim has dominion over all things. That's number one. Abigail was blessed because she used the keys to success. The first key to success is recognizing that Elohim has dominion over all things. And the second key to success is recognizing that Elohim has given mankind dominion over all things on the earth. Are you on the earth? Am I on the earth? Yes, we are. That means we should have dominion over ourselves. And Abigail was able to help David learn how to use the keys to success, so that the result was David learned to dominate his dominion, meaning he learned to dominate his thoughts, emotions, and actions. So please read 1 Samuel chapter 25, a beautiful story of Abigail saving her husband's neck until God wiped him out. So she didn't have any blood on her hands. David didn't have any blood on his hands. God took care of it. She pacified David. And eventually, as the story goes on, David asked Abigail to marry her. She did marry him. So she became one of the queens of Israel. Because of her being able to dominate her dominion, she was a co-regent of David in dominating the dominion of the nation of Israel. Beautiful story how both of them, well, she already had known how to dominate her dominion as she helped David to learn, and together they ruled Israel in a very fine manner. So the result of what Abigail did is a wonderful example for all of us, is worthy of study. I hope you'll go back and listen to this program again and think about it, apply it to yourself. But the result for David was he learned to dominate his thoughts, his emotions, and his actions. David drank his tea. So again, every time you drink a cup of tea, you have a glass bottle of tea that you get from the store. Every time you take a sip of tea, remember that T stands for thoughts, emotions, and actions. Thankfully, David drank the tea that Abigail gave to him. Well, thanks for watching this series of programs titled Dominating Your Dominion. I hope you will watch the next series of programs titled Dominating Your Finances. In this first series of programs about dominating your dominion, we talk specifically about dominating our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. That's our T. In our next series of programs titled Dominating Your Finances, we're going to talk specifically about how God wants us to use our finances. So please tune in for that next series of programs.